St. Lucia, this is Openmike, and we are back to the third segment of our program. When we left off, we were discussing a very, very sensitive and important issue, which is the transformation from one product to another.
Next, yeah.
And Everest was talking.
Yeah, I was saying about the incentives that is being provided by the Trinidad government to get motorists to move on to compressed natural gas, which is a lot cheaper, and they have that in abundance, and to get away from the subsidy of fuel, which they have a limited reserve of, like I said, 30 years. But the problem in that being successful is that you need to have the infrastructure that supplies, can dispense CNG. And it's expensive. So what the government has done now is that if you want to open a new gas station, to get approval, you must have CNG refueling facilities. Okay, that's one. But it's a challenge too for motorists in that some of the manufacturers are saying, look, if you're going to be modifying the vehicle, the warranty will go.
Wow.
Which is understandable, because
Yes.
you have this thing that has to be placed in your boots, this compressed natural
Yes.
tank, and which the manufacturer never catered for. You don't know what hazards it presents, and they're not going to be responsible for the
A
warranty.
quick question for you. You having raised such a sensitive issue, would it have been better to say, look, to phase it in more gradually and let the manufacturers send the cars that are built for that? Or what is your take?
Well, yes, they can, but you see, I don't think the government is sure how disposed the citizens are to moving in that direction. Right. Because there are the challenges of CNG. CNG, there's something called energy density, which really is the amount of energy in every unit of volume of the product. It is very low in terms of CNG. For instance, if you index it against gasoline, say gasoline is 1, CNG is about 0.4. So it's a very low energy. So you're going to have challenges using vehicles, going up hills and these kind of things. I mean, people who are used to buying gasoline and running their vehicle on gasoline, it's going to be quite a bit of an expectation to get them to switch across to this thing.
Yeah. And
but you got to do something. You got to do something.
And you see what is happening there now. Trinidad used to supply 95% of the liquefied gas to the tri-state. But what happened there with the shale gas coming on, the shale gas is only 10% of what Trinidad can produce at that.
Yeah.
But Trinidad was very fortunate because, as you know, so 2 years ago or so, when that took place here, you had the problem with the hurricane in Japan, where the nuclear plant got knocked out.
Yeah.
And since then, the Japanese know what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're just getting over this nuclear thing and this thing to happen there. So they're adamant about putting back nuclear plants.
That's good.
So in the process, to appease the Japanese people, they made a deal with Trinidad, I'm told, and Trinidad gets a fairly good price, and most of the liquefied gas that was going to the States is now going to Asia, okay, in particular Japan. As a matter of fact, that is why one of the reasons that the new Prime Minister has just called for new elections in Japan, because he came up with an idea to sort of reignite the Japanese economy, which has been stagnant for almost 12 or 13 years, and that has failed. So he's going back to the polls for a new mandate. And talking about new mandate, that's interesting, because when it was suggested here in St. Lucia that we should get a new mandate for our government, everybody took offense. But you see what has happened to Japan, because the guy could not produce what he said he'd produce through no fault of his, because there were changes that took place. And what has happened today is that I've just read recently that despite the fact that they are revisiting, despite the fact that the cost of gas is that high and it's affecting the economy, they may very well have to go back to the nuclear situation, because the economy just will not take off because of the variance in cost between the nuclear power
it's huge.
And it's astronomical. So it begs the question, what is Trinidad going to do with their gas?
Well, I mean, you're right in the assessment that since the discovery of shale gas, the Trinidad has lost that U.S. market, but they have been able to sell a lot of it into South America.
Yeah.
I think now 44% of their production of natural gas is going down to South America.
Okay.
And yes, you're right about the Japan thing. But the big attraction about liquefied natural gas is that it's a great fuel for electricity generation. And that's where it's used most.
That's right. Yeah. That's what I was thinking of. Now, you know, also another thing I heard. You remember you talked about that pipeline coming up the islands.
Yes.
Well, I understand that they did go ahead with it. It has now reached Tobago. Now, as you told me earlier, and you're quite right, places like the small islands, it doesn't really make economic sense. Okay?
I don't think it does.
But the line, Barbados needs it and Martinique needs it. And I'm told that definitely it will go ahead to Barbados and Martinique. I know Barbados is on their knees begging for it now because, but the other question is I would like to pose to you, Everest, is the fact that if Barbados, let us say, gets that gas, it's not going to be for what, another 8 years, 7, 8 years?
That takes some time.
And then they put it into all their industry. Again, you know, the cost of doing business in Barbados is quite high, so that would bring it down significantly. How?
I mean, I have my own reservations about the viability of this project for LNG to go the pipeline. From the little I've heard, I mean, even there are technical issues in getting this pipeline across the region. But be that as it may, you asked the question about if LNG was perhaps be able to get into Barbados, and which they would use essentially as a fuel to generate electricity.
Correct.
Or they'll have a huge advantage over us insofar as the cost of energy where it relates to the tourism sector.
Yeah.
So that's a huge component cost of the tourism industry.
But you know,
we'll be at a disadvantage there.
Yeah. My contact in Trinidad told me, however, that they are now trying to design tanks that could be placed on ships to bring the gas here in bulk. Okay. Do they bring gas already in bulk here? No, they bring it in cylinders, eh?
No, they bring it in bank. The tankers come in and they deposit the product at here.
And even with that, that has not reduced the cost, eh?
No.
Why is that? I mean, it has to be cheaper if gas is coming on a pipeline.
Of course it is.
But remember one thing: the capital cost of putting it out is very high. So that has to be factored in.
And that's it. Is it worth it? I mean, in terms of returns down the road, to recover that heavy capital cost over a very long period of time.
Yeah.
And the truth is, there are cheaper ways of doing this.
Yeah. Now, Everest, we have discussed a lot on the energy sector, and I wouldn't say we've exhausted it because there's, you know, as a business person, I want to say to you that my business has suffered tremendously in the last 2 to 3 years since the implementation of VAT here in St. Lucia. What do you think, you know, I have not been silent about it. I have said from day one that it was the greatest mistake to implement VAT into St. Lucia. I thought there should have been a 5% sales tax. Many economists and bankers and other politicians on the right side or the wrong side, whatever you call it, tend to disagree with me. What is your take?
On the issue of the implementation of VAT, I think it's a question of timing.
Correct.
Okay. As to whether it was at the right timing of the economic cycle, it is looking not so. It perhaps didn't happen at the right time.
Yeah, I did say that. Yeah.
Okay. And of course, it's exacerbated a very difficult situation. So it's very easy to lay all the burden on VAT. But the truth is, the government had to find some measure, some system of collecting revenue to run the country.
Yeah, but Everest, can I ask you one question? As a business person, there are 2 ways of keeping money. By not spending, by not overspending, yeah, or getting more revenue. I will agree that that's why we use the word marketing, so we can go out to get more revenue for our businesses. But by the same token, there are areas you can cut back on. I mean, I have also been quite vocal on the situation of embassies abroad. Okay, we are spending $18 million a year. I've told the Prime Minister time and time again, look, it is nice to do those things when we could afford to do it. But you have St. Lucians living abroad who are quite educated. And I have absolutely no problem with what you call with politics at play. If they are labor people living in New York, Washington, that's fine by me. Take them in as an honorary council and do what you have to do. okay? And let us cut down on those things. There's empathy. Only yesterday, I met with someone at the New India Insurance Company, okay? They just had this opening. And I was surprised because I want to contact the Indian authorities about trying to work. I'm serious about doing a university in St. Lucia. And he told me they just have one embassy in Suriname. Now there's a big country with 1.5 billion people with one embassy down there. We have embassies all about the place. So, but I don't want to detract from what you were saying because it makes sense. It's always good to hear the other side of the story about the VAT situation.
I was saying that, and those who claim, you see, and those who claim, look, okay, you said 5%. Now always remember, when you set a tax rate at 5% or whatever percent.
Now without cutting short, I meant 5% right across the board.
I'd
put it on everything.
Yeah, fair enough. But when you set a tax rate, whatever it is, always remember that you are never going to get that 5% you're looking for. That's a given. Because there'll be leakage. People will not be honest.
But I thought you could take it up front of the customs. Take it, put a 5% across the board.
Well,
yeah, because I think allowing business people to collect money, you're looking for trouble.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. 3 years ago when we went to St. Vincent, I met with Ralph Gonzalez when we were opening up. And he said to me, he said, Shas, I have $112 million in VAT I cannot collect. I told Prime Minister Anthony that. And I said to him, you're not going to get the VAT. Many of us here, I'm not trying to isolate ourselves as the most honest people. You, me, I know I would not touch 1 cent of government's VAT money.
And I won't mess around with that either.
I won't mess around with it because they do their audits and I'm not going to mess around with that. I'm not going to, I'd rather close my business than have to pinch a $1 from the VAT money. That is the law and that. But there are a lot of people not paying VAT in this country. I know that for a fact.
Well, you see, that is quite true. And even having said that, there's a bit of good news there. In that the level of compliance in St. Lucia is higher than most regions. Surprisingly. But it still can be better. But to make the point I was saying earlier on, whatever rate you put in there, almost remember there'll always be leakage. So if you say 5% and there's 80% compliance, then it effectively you collect 4%. Now 4% may not be able to cut it.
But don't you think let us say whatever we had cut, we do that in conjunction with our overspending.
Yes,
the two together.
It has to be agreed. Yes.
Everest, we come to the end of the 3rd segment of our program. We'll be right back.